Okay, let's see if it works better this time. This is White Lightning 777, and this is my next video in the series Banning Social Contagions, discussing Vaxx-tardation. The fact of the matter is that both Big Pharma and quacks lie about vaccines, and what neither side says is entirely scientifically accurate. It is, however, designed to separate you from your money. So we'll discuss all of the myths that both Big Pharma and quacks spread in one place, so that you'll just be able to refer to this video and hopefully avoid giving and spending money on drugs you don't need and lectures that aren't worth the time. So, the first myth about about vaccines is that they can provide a broad spectrum immunity against an entire family of germs. That's not the case. Now, if you are given a vaccine to one particular type of virus, okay, that's all you're going to be immune to. And as long as that virus in the shot matches what's in nature, and it doesn't even have to be the entire virus, it could just be part of the virus. It could be like the shell protein or the spike protein or a nucleotide protein or various parts of it. That's all you're going to be immune to, and that's all your system is going to react to. Now, there is a workaround for that. One of the things you can do, it's called a polyvariant vaccine. That's where you take viruses that are related to one another or that occur together and put them all in the shot at once. And one of the most successful polyvariant vaccines is the pneumonia vaccine, which has about 36 different types of microbes that cause pneumonia, and it's a 2-shot series, and you get those shots, and then you're immune to all 36 of them. But again, and this is harmless, your immune system is exposed to hundreds, if not thousands, of antigens each day. And that's even if you don't leave your house. So your immune system does have the ability to process that kind of data. Okay? The second myth, and this is one that quacks will tell you, is that vaccines cause cancer. No, they don't. There is not a single VAERS report, okay, or documented case of a vaccine causing cancer, especially months, years later. They're not carcinogenic. Okay, cancer is caused by things like, unnatural forms of sex, smoking, alcohol use, exposure to chemicals, and so on. It's caused by the usual suspects. I mean, if the Marlboro Man, visits you regularly every morning at the bedside, that's what's going to give you cancer. Okay, it's just not one of the documented side effects, the typical but they do have side effects. The idea, they don't have side effects, that's not true either. The side effects are most similar to food allergies, nut allergies, seafood allergies. People can go into anaphylactic shock, they can have rashes, they can have fevers, they can have pain at the injection site. Sometimes the fever is serious enough to require hospitalization. They are designed to provoke an immune reaction, and so an allergic reaction is possible. The same thing is true of bee stings, for example. And the hazards vaccine poses are, it's pretty, it's as similar to a bee sting. I mean, if you have a history of anaphylaxis from multiple sources or unknown sources, you might not be a vaccine candidate. Something to consider. But of course, there's also many other types of foodstuffs and drugs that you probably can't take either. Okay, those people know who they are. And if you're not one of them, you don't have to worry about it. The third myth is that somehow vaccines are profitable. The fact is they're not. Many of the vaccines sold today are actually government subsidized, and there's liability protections given to the manufacturers because your profitability is essentially zero. Keep in mind, there are no big pharma companies that only make vaccines. Okay, and this is something, again, quacks will gloss over this. Oh, they only make vaccines. No. If you look at big pharma companies that are profitable, they'll have much more profitable drugs, things like Ozempic or, what's that, botulism toxin for plastic surgery, and drugs that have a much higher margin, and the vaccine is sort of the loss leader. Okay, that's their business model. What is profitable, however, is quackery. So if you're like Ms. Tenpenny and people are paying you $500 to teach you how to scare people, and yourself, I mean that's where the quacks have a much higher profit margin than big pharma does. So when quacks talk about their profit margin, this is definitely a case of the pot calling the kettle black, because it takes millions of dollars to get certifications and develop a new kind of drug or treatment for anything. Okay, but for the cost of a pulpit and a cheap microphone, a quack can get up and sell people bottles of useless chemicals and give a speech and charge hundreds of dollars. That's where the profitability is. That's where the capitalistic exploitation lies. So again, the basic theory is sound. Another myth is that the effectiveness of the vaccine is related to how deadly whatever it is you're vaccinating against. That's simply not the case. The effectiveness is based on the similarity to what's in the shot, assuming you have a healthy immune system, versus what you're actually exposed to in the real world. And as a practical matter, they have to be practically identical or it doesn't work. It's just like the key to your car. Okay? Now your immune system can shift on the fly if germs do disguise themselves in nature. If they come back, and your immune system knows how to do that. But the vaccine isn't going to help you with that. Okay? What makes a vaccine work, and we'll go over what does make a vaccine work. Well, first of all, they work best against antigens that have a moderate to long incubation period. That way, your body has enough time with the antibodies, with the memory T cells, have enough time to multiply and change into killer T cells, and the memory B cells have enough time to start cranking out antibodies before you become symptomatic. So the first thing you need for an antigen to really vaccinate against an antigen, it needs to have long to moderate incubation period. I mean, if you're going symptomatic in 12 hours, that's not going to help you. At best, the vaccine, the duration of the illness might be shortened, but you're still going to be symptomatic. The second thing, of course, is genetic stability. Germs that are viruses, bacterias, whatever, fill in the blanks, that are genetically unstable and mutate rapidly can't be vaccinated against by any method, because what's in nature will not be what is in the vaccine. And unless you're working with known strains in a lab, now if you're working with a highly mutagenic virus in a lab, known strains, let's say I'm at Fort Detrick and I'm working with coronavirus wild type. Well, I could get a wild type vaccine, most likely also made in the same lab, because I'm working with that exact strain. But that's not going to protect me from something on the street. In most cases, trying to vaccinate against genetically unstable organisms with short incubation periods is simply nuts. Those are better treated with drug therapies. That's why, on the one hand, if you think about the coronavirus failure, that's why the CCP bioweapon vax failed. What was in the shot was probably fine, and it probably did work against that exact strain. Okay, but what's out in nature is not what's in the vaccine. That's why, on the one hand, extreme reptile keepers can inject themselves with small amounts of cobra venom and get immune to cobra venom and snake venom. In fact, Vice even has an entire episode on people who get high injecting snake venom, and they can protect themselves successfully. So it is kind of strange. It's an interesting question. Well, how come you can protect yourself against that, but not a stupid bulb? Because the snake venom doesn't change. A snake venom is genetically determined. Snakes have a 10 or 20 year lifespan. Okay, generally, it's assuming the absence of predators. And their venom has been the same for millions of years. It doesn't change a whole lot. If you were concerned about snakes in your area, let's say you lived where there were really poisonous snakes, you could get snake venom, and you could, get a professional, a doctor, and you could begin small doses, and you could become immune to that. Now, only a handful of people across the world have actually done that, and generally speaking, the anti-venom at a hospital is usually a more cost-effective way to deal with the problem. And sometimes your immune system can overreact to the snake venom, and again, you can run into the risk of shocks. And look at the hazards of the vaccine. Another thing about the CCP virus vaccine that quacks like to peddle is everybody's going to die from it. No, they won't. The actual mortality from all in America, from combined of all the different kinds of CCP bioweapon vaxes, and I suspect most of them fall in the mRNA ones, is 25 out of a million. So out of every million doses, 25 people are going to get killed by it, which is about the same as Omicron. So, you take your money, you take your chances. And people who were killed by the vax, and it's also highly improbable. And another thing, quacks will say, well, they would have survived the virus if they were killed by the vaccine. Highly unlikely. If your immune system, if your body responds so poorly to a shot, a live, dangerous organism isn't going to play nice with it either. Another myth, another one, again, spread by quacks, is that vaccines give you cancer. No, they don't. That's not one of the side effects. The side effects of vaccines are similar to food allergies, anaphylactic shocks, rashes, seizures, things, trouble breathing, intestinal distress, things like that. It's similar to what would happen to a person if they ate a shellfish and they were allergic, or they ate, peanuts and they're allergic to peanuts or something like that. The reactions are very similar to food allergies. And the symptoms, and the most common symptoms, are remarkably similar to food allergies or bee stings, which are things we encounter every day. For most people, if you get a shot, it's no different than getting stung by a bee in your garden. Okay? The fact remains that and the other myth, of course, and this is one spread by quacks, is that somehow there's something called a nanomachine that can be put into the shot. This is pure social contagion, that nanomachines controlled by radio waves. Well, first of all, to have something for a radio wave to control an object, the antenna, the height of the antenna or width of it has to be equal to or greater than the actual size of the radio wave. So if the radio wave, let's say you're using a light beam that's a frequency of 1 millimeter. Well, that means your antenna has to be at least 1 millimeter high, or it's not going to work. Well, a microscopic machine is far smaller than a radio wave. A radio wave can have a bandwidth of several inches. That's why if you look at your antenna on your car, it's at least 8 inches to a foot wide, because that radio wave is probably an inch or two high. So your nanomachine would need to have an inch or two long antenna on it, like a walkie-talkie radio, and it wouldn't be a nanomachine anymore now, would it? A second problem with these nanomachines is that the power sources can't be miniaturized. A nanomachine cannot run off of the cellular machinery or nutrients in your body the way that a parasite or a bacterium can. It needs its own battery, and batteries can't be miniaturized. Now, what are the implications here? If you could miniaturize a battery so small that you could power a machine small enough to go through a hypodermic needle, okay? If you had that kind of technology, you could just get an electric car, charge it once in the factory, and drive it for 20 years. You could have electric planes that could fly without ever needing to be refueled. You could have laser guns the size, the size of Bic lighters, and just use it forever. The technical implications would be revolutionary. It would truly be a major breakthrough. But we aren't there yet, and we're about 50 years out from developing such a thing. Nanomachines are pure science fiction. Okay? And, now if you get abducted by aliens on a UFO and they give you a shot, I can't help you. You're going to have other issues. Okay? So, again, somebody shows you pictures, all that nanomachine, it's all AI fakes. It's not real. It doesn't exist. It's all fake. And now the other myth spread by quacks is that somehow an mRNA molecule can make more than one copy of a protein, that they just keep going. That's not the way it works. Think of making a protein. Think of pouring metal, casting, let's say, a piston rod. Okay, you have your sand casting and you pour in the steel. Okay, and then when the rod solidifies, you break the casting and you remove the rod. The mRNA is like the casting. The mRNA, what it does is it attaches to the ribosome, which is an organelle that's contained in your cell, goes in one side, and free-floating amino acids attach in the correct order of the genes on the ribosome. So when the mRNA enters, gene 1 is up, and let's say that protein is guanine. Okay, so it goes there, bang, the guanine is attached. Then the guanine gene from the mRNA is kicked off, and let's say the next amino acid is cytosine. Okay, so then gene 2 goes into the ribosome, and cytosine, click, attaches. Then the cytosine gene, click, is broken off. And let's say the third protein is thymine, okay? And then that attaches, that goes in. The thymine attaches, and when that happens, the thymine gene is kicked off, and the mRNA, and so on. The mRNA is destroyed as the protein then emerges from the ribosome, and it begins to fold and produce its final form. That's how proteins are made. And the way your body regulates how many proteins or how much hormones of a given type, the way your body regulates that is by regulating the number of copies of mRNA. So let's say you're a man and you are, entering puberty. Well, the mRNA for testosterone, as you're entering puberty, you're going to make much more mRNA for testosterone, and your body's going to produce that. So the idea that one mRNA can just go and cycle and crank out an infinite number of proteins, that's something quacks talk about. That's just not the way nature works, and it can't be made to work that way. Okay, the fourth myth is that all by itself, with no help, RNA can turn back into DNA. Wrong. That can never happen by itself because the cell nucleus is not permeable to RNA. DNA can go in and out. RNA can only leave the nucleus. It can't get back in. Okay. Now, RNA viruses get around this by using an enzyme called reverse transcriptase. And what that does is that turns the RNA back into DNA, which then can enter the nucleus. Now, to become part of the cell permanently, that DNA needs a second enzyme, and this is one that the AIDS virus has that makes it insidious. It's called integrase. And what the integrase does is it takes that isolated segment and plugs it into a chromosome. See, in the nucleus, if you have a gene, a segment of DNA, the nucleus is just going to turn that DNA back into RNA and kick it out into the cell to be made into a protein. That's how the J&J shot works. It uses adenovirus. The adenovirus puts in the DNA. The DNA actually does, unlike RNA vaccines, this actually does enter the nucleus, does get turned into RNA, and then, it makes the spike protein. So that's how that goes. Now, specifically in terms of hantavirus, this is how Fauci should do his job. And we'll look at each of the criteria for if a vaccine is justified. The first criteria, of course, is lethality. Now, with 30 or 40% lethality if untreated and about 5 to 10% if you're in a hospital setting, the hantavirus does satisfy the first criteria. It is dangerous enough, if you catch it, to be treated. The second criteria is the incubation period. The hantavirus, on average, has between 1 to 8 weeks of an incubation period before you go symptomatic. So if you do have immunity, or if you get exposed and go running to the hospital to get your shot, your body is going to have, and it takes on average, a week and a half to 3 weeks for your body to make the memory B cells and T cells to get you immunity. Chances are your body will have sufficient time for those to work. So even just after exposure, a vaccine will work. The third criteria for hantavirus, in a study from comparing samples of the Andes virus from 2018 to 2026, has shown that over 99% of the virus's DNA is identical. It has a very slow rate of mutation. So it is genetically stable. So, unlike the coronavirus, which is one of the worst possible antigens you could have, if you did make a safe and effective vaccine, it would actually work. Now, what you would do, of course, common sense, is you would take not just the Andes strain of it, but all of the strains of hantavirus in your region. Like, say, if you're making a hantavirus vaccine for the USA, you would make it to tourist spots people go to around the world, plus domestic hantavirus, and put it in a polyvariant vaccine. The reason why is that way, after a person tests for it, you don't have to go and figure out which exact virus it is to match. You could just grab something off the shelf and go. And it'll prevent reinfection. Most likely only 1 or 2 shots will be necessary. So it does meet those criteria. However, it fails on the contagion factor. Hantavirus requires prolonged human contact to catch it. It requires you sitting next to someone for hours. And one of the most common ways that it's caught is being sexually transmitted. In other words, the transmission of hantavirus is a lot more like monkeypox than the coronavirus. Maybe a handshake would get it. Caregivers, or people who are in a small crowded room where the air is being recirculated for hours and hours might get it. So it's not all that contagious. Okay, the R naught is far less than 1. So again, the fact that the virus kills so many people prevents you from transmitting, because once you die, you can't transmit that virus anymore. Okay? As viruses, highly mutagenic viruses like coronavirus, become more contagious and less dangerous over time, because they want to replicate. In fact, they want to infect the same host over and over and over again. Hantavirus, that's it. It's not contagious enough to justify a vaccine. Now, and it definitely isn't contagious enough to justify widespread vaccination. Okay? I mean, even when you look at other diseases like rabies and anthrax that are dangerous, we don't give every school kid a rabies shot. Even though rabies is basically 100% fatal. We just give it upon sign of exposure. Okay? And hantavirus vaccine should be handled, if it's made, the same way that rabies and anthrax are made. When exposure, you give it to the person that's been exposed and other people around them. And that's a strategy called ring vaccination that was used with smallpox. So if you had a smallpox case, you'd vaccinate that was exposed, you'd vaccinate them, and then you'd vaccinate everybody in their household to form a ring, so that way it can't jump. And that would be the correct way to deal with hantavirus. Now, in the United States, there are only about 30 cases of infection with that each year. So if you had 30 people, and let's say you live on average of 3 people in your household, you would be giving about 120 doses a year. This is clearly something that's not going to be profitable for Big Pharma. Moderna can go ahead and try to make one just to say they did it, but they're not going to make any money off of it. Now, if someone does do gain of function on hantavirus and does make it airborne, whatever vaccine exists now isn't going to work. If someone, let's say in 2028, makes it airborne, well, any vaccine you make today is not going to work because you're going to need that mutated strain to make your vaccine. Because again, one strain, being immunized to one strain, will not protect you from another. So again, should the hantavirus vaccine be made? I would say yes, probably. And how should it be used? It should be used selectively, like rabies vaccines are used or anthrax vaccines are used. Okay. And I guess who should get it? Well, most people don't farm rats and mice. They're not exposed to large numbers of rodents, so there's probably not a whole lot of reason to get it. Now, you could argue with all the rats in Baltimore, perhaps people may feel, you'll probably get people that are afraid of rats and mice who want to get it just because they're afraid of rats and mice. But, assuaging a phobia is not a valid reason to get a vaccine. You shouldn't get a vaccine purely for psychological reasons. Okay, Big Pharma and doctors will tell you, well, if you're afraid of a disease, go ahead and get vaccinated against it. Vaccines are not psych meds. If you have a phobia problem, you need to take psych meds. So, again, this is White Lightning 777 signing out. And best news of all, I even got work tonight. God bless America. Long live our republic. Long live our empire. And hopefully you learned something. And remember, don't give them any money. Don't give them your money. Tell them to get a job. And I'll close and say this lastly. As far as these quacks go, they're not held responsible. If quacks were actually thrown in jail or executed every time their bad advice killed people, I guarantee you, that would put a stop to it pretty quick. This is White Lightning 77, signing off.